Hello, Fearless Gamers! Matt here for Fearless Games, and today we're going to continue on with our How to Play Battlefleet Gothic. I held off on making this video a little bit longer purposely because the specialist forums were down with all the PDF files, and they just recently put them back up, I believe, last Thursday. So, now that those files are back up, we'll continue on, and I'll put a link in the description so you can go along with us with this. And so, what we've gone over in the last video was basic principles, 3D in a 3D space, special orders, how leadership works, and now and origin of models, where points of measurement are done on models. So now we're going to continue on with the next step. Now, first thing you do, obviously, when you play a game is you pick a deployment zone, you decide who's going first, and you decide what type of mission base you're doing. If you're just doing a standard, annihilation, you can actually just pick, a deployment zone. And as, most of the time, me and my friends just settle on something, and then we go off on that. And to determine who's going first, we just do standard 40k, roll a d6, see who the highest goes first. If you do certain missions in the book, it'll actually define out a little bit better how to set up your deployment zone, who goes where, and all that other stuff. But in general, if you're not using any, set rules for, a mission base or anything, you could just basically do it as you see fit, since there's no real rule set for that. It's basically like old 3rd edition Warhammer 40,000, where all they said was, deployment zone is this, go with it. So you could just basically convert the deployment zones for Warhammer 40k and just apply it and convert it to be usable in Battlefleet Gothic. So, now that we've got that done, you have your mission set up, you have your ships listed on your fleet registry, and you have your leadership values rolled. So now we're ready for the very first turn in the game. And the turn is broken up into, let's see, 4 different phases. There's the movement phase, the shooting phase, the ordnance phase, and then the end phase. Since now we've been approved for a longer time, we're going to talk about the movement and the shooting phase all in one video. So this one's going to be a long one, because the shooting phase can be a little complicated, but it's going to be better than me trying to break it up into 17 different videos just to explain 2 phases. First thing that happens in the movement phase is you go under special orders with every ship that you want to have special orders. So you take 2d6, you roll, and you have to meet or get under the leadership of the ship in question. And if you do pass your check, then the ship is now under special order. And you do this with every ship that you want under special orders at this time. Now, as mentioned before, if you fail your leadership check with one ship, then you cannot go under special orders at all for the rest of that turn. So think of it like a game of telephone. One person screws it up, he screws it up for everybody. It's supposed to be like a representation of the breakdown in communication lines on the battlefield. So what's usually the best strategy is your highest leadership first goes with special orders, and then you go down to your lowest. So that's usually the best way to apply special orders in this game. Once special orders have been done, next to do is to move your ships. And the way this is done is you pick a ship, you move it, apply the turn that you want it to do if you want to make any turns, move on to the next ship. So as said before, we do all measurement by the stem of the ship itself. So you move the ship forward, and it has to move a minimum of half its move distance. So, let's say if it has a move distance of 20 centimeters, you have to move a minimum of 10 centimeters forward, unless you're using the special order burn retros. That's the only exception to this rule. But every other ship, aside from those under that special order, has to move minimally half its movement forward. This is supposed to represent inertia. In space, once you start moving, it takes a lot to stop you from moving. Now, turning, you perform you perform one turn in each ship's movement, unless otherwise noted in the Army's special rules. Also, that goes for movement restrictions, because I know the Eldar have some weird, funky, different rules for that than other ships. So, you get one turn in your movement. Depending on the ship determines when the turn can be done. Battleships have to move 15 centimeters before they can make their turn. Cruisers have to move 10 centimeters before they can make their turn. Escorts can make their turn whenever they please, so they are not limited to a certain movement before making their turn. And like I said, you can only do one turn per movement, and unless you do come to a new heading, which at that point the second turn happens when the ship is finished moving. So it would be move, turn, if you were under the order come to a new heading. Any other ship that's not under that, it would just be move, certain distance, turn, move. Now, let's now break this down into a visual aid, because I think that works a little bit better. So we've got ourselves a Gothic cruiser right here. The Gothic cruiser wishes to make a turn, and this is how we do it. Since it's a cruiser, it has to move 10 centimeters forward. So we move the ship 10 centimeters forward ahead. At that point, we are now allowed to make our turn in this movement. So we take the bearing compass and place it down over the ship, so the arrow is riding along the nose of the ship. We then, if you notice, the black lines that indicate the different sections of the ship are actually marked out to do 45-degree turns, which is what a Gothic cruiser is allowed to do. So we then take the ship and turn it in the direction that we want to go until the nose of the ship is lined up with the black line indicating the 45-degree mark. At that point, we then continue our move forward, since we have to keep moving. And that's all you have to do for making a turn. So it's really simple, and it's probably the simplest stage in this turn of a Battlefield Gothic game, minus the end phase. And so that's it. Now the only thing you have to do is apply this to every other ship in your force. This is by far the longest phase in the entire game. As per usual with most games by Games Workshop, the shooting phase tends to take the longest amount of time. Now, before we move on with the shooting phase, there are a couple of extra principles I need to introduce to you guys that will make this go a little bit smoother. First and foremost is target priority. In this game, ships that are closer to your vessel pose a bigger threat than the ones further away. Because of this, the captain of your ship is most likely going to want to order to fire on the closest ship over the furthest ship in the furthest ship. But you don't have to actually shoot at the closest ship if you don't want to. You may fire at a ship that's further away from you. In order to do this, you need to roll 2d6, and you need to roll equal or under your leadership. If you do this, you may ignore the closest enemy vessel to fire at one that's further away, but if you fail, you're then forced to fire at the closest enemy vessel. There is a tiny loophole in this rule. That is, as long as you fire one shot at the closest enemy vessel, you can then fire everything else at a different ship. It's just like, sort of like, humoring the vessel, you know, oh, I'm scared. Okay, we fired at it, we're good. Okay, let's fire at something else. So you don't have to, you're not forced to fire at the closest enemy vessel. So what I usually do is I find the weapon that's most likely going to damage that one and have a less chance of damaging the one I really want to fire at, and fire that at the closest vessel. Mainly I do it with the weapon batteries. The weapon batteries are probably the best thing to use to fire at your closest target priority and save your lances for further away objects. So now, let's say if you have two ships that you can fire at, but one ship is closer than the other, but certain weapons can't fire at the closer ship. Well, again, as long as the weapons that can fire at least once at the closest ship, the ones on its other side that can't actually fire at the closest vessel may shoot at the one that's in their firing arc, but is technically further away. Another thing that we need to talk about also is blast markers. Now, blast markers basically represent explosions in space. They are used for when ships take damage, or when escorts and other vessels explode. Now, the way that they apply is they have a couple of different functions. For each blast marker that's touching the base of a ship, it reduces the ship's shields by 1, down to 0. After that, they have no other effect. They also, any ship that moves through them, suffers a 5 centimeters loss from their maximum movement, but only once. So in this example here, we've got a Gothic class cruiser, and it's going to pass 3 blast markers. The Gothic cruiser only reduces its movement by 5 centimeters, not 15. Now, it also serves for ships that suffer shield collapse on the critical damage chart, or ships that innately don't have shields that most vessels do, like the Eldar and the Dark Eldar. They have, when they move past the blast marker, they have to roll a d6, and on a roll of a 6, they suffer a point of damage. This is again for the first initial one only. So, like in this example, the Eldar's vessel has to pass 4 different blast markers. Again, it only reduces its movement by 5, not 20. And as it moves past, it only rolls 1d6, and not 4. And if it rolls a 6, it suffers a point of damage. If not, it got away scot-free. Now, the other thing we also have to talk about is how ships take damage. They suffer damage every time they suffer a hit to themselves when being attacked. But their shields are the first thing to take the impact. Shields are basically extra wounds. And it's a representation, and it's represented by the flight stand of your vessel. So basically that clear disc is an invisible bubble, in a sense. Now, every time it takes damage, you place 1 blast marker for every point of damage that the ship's shields absorb. Each shield can absorb 1 point of damage. So, in this example here, we've got a battleship and a cruiser vessel. Battleships tend to have minimum about 4 shields, and cruisers have a minimum of 2 usually, with some exceptions. Now, the battleship suffers 2 points of damage. We then place 2 blast markers, place them so they're touching the base, and now it only has 2 shields left. So it can do this 2 more times. The cruiser suffers 2 attacks as well. It takes 2 blast markers touching its base, and now it has no more shields, and any other damage that's done to it affects the ship directly. The way ships take damage directly is once they've been hit, you go to their listing on the chart, and there's a little number box for damage. You would mark which number is their most, so if it has 6 hit points, you would circle the 6 box, and then you would cross off from there. So say if a ship with 6 hit points takes 3 damage, you would cross off the 6, the 5, and the 4. When ships lose half their number of starting out hit points, they are officially crippled. Crippled vessels have to have, rounding up, their weapon strength, weapon firepower, their turrets, their shields, and reduce their movement by 5. Vessels that have Nova Cannons hooked up to them lose the ability to fire their Nova Cannon once they've become crippled. And in the case of a ship that is crippled and wants to do the Brace for Impact rule special order, it halves its stats again. It doesn't ignore it because it's been crippled, it just halves its stats again. Essentially, its crippled status is its new base number. Now, every time a vessel takes damage directly, damage that the shields weren't able to absorb, you roll a d6 for each damage point taken. On a roll of a 6, you suffer a critical hit. The way you resolve critical hits is this. You would go to the critical hit chart, which is on page 24 of the rulebook, and you would roll 2d6. You would total those 2d6 together and find the corresponding number here, and then follow the extra damage, if any, and apply the special result to that vessel. So, let's just say, for example, we rolled a 6 on the critical damage chart. We would go here, it would be an extra point of damage would be applied, and then the engine room damage. The engine room is rocketed by explosions, forcing all hands to tend to the reactors. The ship may not make any turns until this damage is repaired. That ship then has that effect applied to it until it gets rid of it. We'll talk about that later because that's in a different phase. Now, what if a ship loses all of its hit points? In the case of escorts, you just remove them and you place a blast marker down where they were. In the case of cruisers and battleships, you would then, when they hit 0 hit points, go to page 26 in the book and look at the catastrophic damage chart. You would then do the exact same thing as you would apply critical damage. Roll 2d6, find the corresponding number, and apply the effect that it has written under it. These can be really nasty, to the point where it could, if there's a bunch of ships around it, you could screw yourself over completely, to being, like some of them are really nasty, and then some of them are just like, you know, it's bad that you lost a ship, but they don't hurt you in any way. Usually if you roll under an 8, you're fine, in terms of other ships around it are fine. If you roll anything higher, you got problems at that point. So now the other thing that we have to talk over is shields. As I said, shields represent the, you know, the ship's extra wounds, and and each number of blast marker that's touching your ship reduces the number of shields you have. How do you get those shields back? Is really simple. You move away from blast markers. So let's take a look at this example here. We've got a Gothic class cruiser. We've got 2 Gothic class cruisers. Each of them have 2 blast markers touching their base. So now they have 0 shields. Any damage they take at this point would be affecting them directly. The cruiser on the left then moves forward. It is no longer touching any blast markers. This point, it has all its shields back. So now it has a shield value back from 0 to 2. The Gothic class cruiser on the right moves forward, but it's still touching 1 blast marker that was in its way when it ended its move. That ship now only has 1 shield back, and now has a shield value of 1. So it's real simple, really. To get your shields back, you just have to get your ship so it's not touching any blast markers. So, because it's basically representing that, you know, the shields are, you know, protecting you from the explosions. So any existing explosions are still there, and it's, you know, keeping the force at bay from hurting your ship. So that's really all there is to it. So in essence, you know, number of shields you have, count the number of blast markers on the ship's base, and that tells you if you've lost any or not. So now let's go on to the actual shooting phase of the shooting phase. It's now that we've got all that cleared out of the way. The way the shooting phase works is it's broken down into 5 easy steps. Sure. The first one is choose a ship to fire. Check the ship has targets within range. Check the ship has weapons within firing arc of the target. And then resolve firing, choose another ship to fire. So yes, you're actually allowed to pre-measure everything, because it's supposed to represent all the computer technical readouts telling you how far away each ship is. So you would take the ship that you want and measure out to see which ships are in range, and find out which ones have the closest priority and which ones do not. You would then also check what firing arc they are all in. Now, most ships, with the exception of I think 1 or 2, have just a left, right, and front firing arc that they can have. And some ships have a rear one, but they're very few and far between. So in this example, we have a Gothic cruiser, and it has 2 Chaos vessels in range for it to fire at. Well, then we then take the bearing compass and we place it on top of the Gothic cruiser with the hole facing the center and the black line going across the nose, running along the nose of the ship. And we then basically draw invisible lines across those black lines. And you can then see which firing arc each of the enemy vessels is in. So we can see that one ship is on its starboard or right side, right arc, and another is in its front arc. Now, looking at that, the front arc having no weapons that can fire in the shooting phase can't really shoot then at the cruiser in its front arc. But it has starboard-facing lances, so it can fire at that other cruiser. Now, the lance rules, as say, they're direct fire weapons. This means that they fire directly at the vessel, and they ignore blast markers when determining line of sight. Planets, asteroid fields, and the like still affect them as normal. And like said, and also, just to make a note, ships do not block line of sight. You can shoot above or under them as needed to fire at a different vessel. So if you have one of your friendly vessels in the way, you can still shoot it. You know, they don't block. Now, the way a lance shot works is you first measure distance, and as long as it's within range, you then take the number of lances you have and roll that number of d6s. So, a Gothic cruiser has 4 lances on its starboard side, so we take 4d6 and roll them. For every 4 or greater that we get, that indicates 1 point of damage done to the cruiser. So, let's say in this example, we only rolled 1 4. We take a blast marker, since there's no blast markers already touching the cruiser, excuse me, and place it down on the ship, touching its base, in the direction that it took the fire from. You can't place it on, you know, the front or the side or the rear far side. It has to be where the shot came from. In essence, you know, if you're firing from its side, it can't somehow magically hit it from in the nose. It's supposed to, you know, direct line of fire. So you place it as close to the arc of firing as possible. And then you continue moving on. Now, clarify one thing. Just because it says that it has 4 lances in the on the starboard arc, doesn't mean all 4 have to fire at the same vessel. If there was another vessel in its firing arc, we could fire 2 and 2, or 1 and 3, or 4 at 1. It doesn't matter. The only thing that represents just how many shots you have, not how have to shoot at, not how many you have to shoot at one target. Now, the other weapon that you fire in the shooting phase is weapon batteries. Weapon batteries are more of like a spray fire, you know, hope we hit something. So they're not really a direct fire weapon, which means they are affected by blast markers. How so, we'll get into in just a moment. The way weapon battery weapons work is you first determine which arc, as per usual, that the weapon batteries are in. So, let's go and use this example for this one. This Dictator class vessel has 1 Chaos Cruiser on its starboard side. On its starboard side, it has a weapon firepower, a weapon strength of 6. So, it can fire at that one vessel. Now, the way I've understand it, going off of different rules, is you can split fire of weapon batteries. You can't split fire if they're in different arcs. So, if you have a weapon battery that fires, you know, 6 in the front or left or both sides, you have to pick which side you're going to be firing from. I could be wrong on that. I'm just going off of a special rule listed in the Necron special rules that gives it this one funky thing that it says, so I'm going off of that weapon battery fire can't be split amongst the different arcs. It has to be fired in one arc only, if it can shoot in multiple arcs. What you can do is you can combo all of your weapon battery fire. So, for example, if you have a weapon battery that has 6 in its side arc and 6 in its front, and the front arc can shoot left, right, or front, you can then combo that with the side arc and make it a strength 12 over a strength 6. So now, let's go back to this example. We've got a Dictator class cruiser, as said, it has a weapon battery strength of 6 on its starboard side, and the side that Chaos Cruiser is in. And so we're going to fire at it. First thing we do is we determine which facing the Chaos Cruiser is in. This is which side of the ship is pointing at the origin of fire. If the nose of the ship is pointing at us, then it's counted as closing. If the ship is moving away from the vessel, i.e. its engines are pointing at the weapons firing at it, then it is moving away. If its side is presented to the weapons firing at it, then it's a beam. For this example, we're going to say it's a beam, just because that's classic naval battleship combat. So, we would then go to the weapon chart on page 21. This chart is used for using your weapon battery fire. Now, the way we do it is, as we say, it is a weapon strength of 6, so we mark down the 6 on the weapons chart. We then look at the orientations on top. We have decided that it's moving a beam. That means that its side is presented to the weapons firing at it. and it is a cruiser. Now, cruisers and battleships both are classified as capital ships on this chart, just to make things simpler. So we go to capital ship, and we draw a line down from the 6 and across from the 6 and down from capital ship until they meet. And they meet at the 3. So this means we have a strength 3 firing at this vessel. We would then roll 3d6 and roll. We would then roll 3d6. To determine if we hit the vessel, you look at the target's armor value. Most Chaos vessels are 5, so we would need a 5 or better to hit this vessel. At that point, we'd see, let's say we hit it 2 times. We would then place 2 blast markers where the ship was attacked from, and that would be that. Now, there's a couple of different factors that affect this chart. Let's take the same example again. We're then going to say now we measure out from the vessel to vessel, from stem to stem, and see that it's actually 10 centimeters away. Because it is within 15 centimeters of our vessel, we then make a shift column to the left, turning our 3 dice into 4 dice that we now roll because of that factor. Then we'd roll them as per usual. Any 5s or greater hits it. Again, you take the enemy's chart, see what armor value it is, and that's the number you have to meet or beat. Now let's say it's 30 centimeters away. Because it's 30 centimeters away, we now have to shift 1 over to the right, making our strength only 2. So now we're only rolling 2 dice to attack this vessel. This is to represent the distance shot at it. It's harder to target and determine where basically it's harder to target the vessel because it's so far away, and so there's a little bit of a margin of error of actually shooting over or under the vessel. Now there's one other factor into this. Say that there's a blast marker in front of it. The blast marker makes it an automatic shift to the right. So, let's say as well. So, if the ship is within 15, but the vessel has a blast marker touching it, it's then a shift to the left, shift back to the right, back to neutral. If it's 30 centimeters away or further, and there's a blast marker touching it, it's then 2 steps over to the right. So, essentially, you just look at the chart, okay, numbers, find the neutral number, and then apply any shifts left or right that need to be done. And again, with both direct fire weapons and weapon batteries, after you've hit, if you break through the shields and do direct fire and do direct damage, you would then roll a d6 for each point of damage that got through, and on a 6, you roll on the critical chart. Because weapon batteries are affected by blast markers, it's usually best to fire weapon batteries first, and then fire lances, because weapon batteries are affected by blast markers, whereas lances are not. Now there's one other weapon that's directly fired in the shooting phase, and that's the Nova Cannon. I believe only the Imperials have this, and only a couple of their ships do. Now, the way a Nova Cannon works, now, depending on your book, this is the thing. In the downloaded rules off the specialist site, it is a 30 centimeter to 150 centimeter ranged weapon. In the blue book, it's a guess weapon to between 30 centimeters and 150 centimeters. This book, guess weapons, no. Why would you be guessing in space? Especially since you have all these special technological advances to tell you exactly where things are, so it kind of serves no purpose for it to be a guess weapon. So, we're going to go with the updated version where it's not a guess weapon, because that makes more sense. Pardon me. So, what we do for the Nova Cannon is this. You have the bearing compass, if you flip it around, is actually a blast marker as well. I don't have one present on me right now, so I can't show you. But you flip it around, and there's a giant blast marker representation. So the way you would do this, then, is this. You would measure how far you want to fire, between 30 and 50 centimeters, and 150 centimeters. The blast marker has to stay completely within the 150 centimeters. You can't put it where the center is at 150 centimeters. No, the far edge has to be within 150 centimeters. You then take a scattered die and a number of d6, which is determined by how far away you're shooting. If you're shooting within 45 centimeters, you roll 1d6. Between 45 and 60, it's 2d6. Between 60 and 150, it's 3d6. You then roll the scatter die and the number of dice. On a roll of a hit, it stays right where it is. On a arrow, you move it in that direction the number of centimeters forward that you rolled on the d6s that you rolled. Any vessel that touches the template, the base of the template, is hit automatically. Shields absorb as normal. If the circle, the hole cut out in the center, touches the base of the ship, it suffers a d6 number of hits, and shields absorb as normal. With one thing to keep in note. The Eldar, the Dark Eldar, I believe, I could be wrong, the Tyranids, because I haven't played with them yet, and the Necrons have an armor save. This save, when it comes to Nova Cannons and the suffering d6 shots, is rolled on the initial. So, you have an Eldar vessel, and it gets the center of the blast template touches its base. You roll a d6. If you pass your armor save, you're fine. If you fail your armor save, you then roll the d6 to determine how many number of shots it took. You can't negate... it's either all or none. You can't roll one for each hit. It's roll for the initial hit. If you fail, see how much damage you suffer. If you pass, then that's it. And the other weapon is Ordnance. Ordnance happens in a different phase, but me and my friends always place them down in the shooting phase. This way we know, and there's no argument about what ship fired what. Since it technically is a shooty weapon, we always feel, okay, this guy's launching... So basically we go, this guy's launching torpedoes, and we place it down, and then we ignore it for the rest of the shooting phase. But that is all going to be happening in another video when we talk about the Ordnance phase. So, thank you all for watching. If I have made if I've made something completely confusing, or there's just something I didn't explain clearly enough, leave a comment and I will do an FAQ video in response to this one that should hopefully clarify any miscommunications I might have done. And so, until next time, Fearless Gamers, take care.